Hello, and welcome to this nutty episode of Fixing Cars. Right? Isn't it nice?
It is.
Pulleys. Something down here is making all that noise. For starters, we got a lot of stuff to check on here, and we'll get through it, but I wanted you to hear that first. Like I never left. You're right. When you move this hose to get this off, make sure you put the clamp back. I just unplugged this. This has been sitting there for God knows how long. So it's done quite a number to that intake boot, but it should be okay. I've forgotten them too, so I don't feel too bad. We have this valve cover gasket, and it's leaking a little bit. It's not the worst. If it is my car, I just clean it off and let it go for the time being, wait for it to get a little worse before I finally change it. But they wanted to know, so it definitely falls under leaking. I'm sure the vacuum pump is leaking too. Yep, you can see that right there. Let's go into the car. Love it. Oh, you love it when your under tray is held up by, well, seems like one zip tie, or yeah, I don't know what you call those zip ties. Leaking pretty profusely under here though. Got a decent oil leak right there. They asked us to check the rear main. I don't think that is necessarily the case. I do think that that is coming from further up, and probably the vacuum pump. And also I think they're worried about the transmission pan. We're gonna get this under tray off though. But it is leaking pretty good down here. Not the crank seal. Not pleasant, not pleasant. So let's get some stuff moved out of the way and take another look. Couple things. Yes, the vacuum pump is leaking. That is making all this mess right here. And this is actively leaking. You can see all the oil on the back of it. This is, I'm gonna have to pull that filter off and see if they've got the correct gasket inside of it. That seems like a possibly incorrect gasket's leading it to leak. So I'll have to pull that off. And then I would also like to pull down these belts and check the pulleys to find out which one's making all that hellacious amounts of noise. This could lead to a lot of this mess under here, especially when it's blowing around under the car. The axles are making one heck of a clicking noise when they go, when you turn them to the extremes. Both the boots on the outside are torn, but I do not see that they have slung out all their grease, so I'm not really sure why they're making so much noise. They definitely are making a ton of noise. I pulled it inside and backing out of the parking space. Click, 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 click. You know, it made clicks on both sides, depending on which axle I turned as hard as I could, or to which direction. So they also want us to check the tie rod ends. Is that dirt, or is it's not leaking anything? That's just dirt. Seems like they live down a sandy road. They live down a sandy road on one side of their car. I don't think the valve cover, see, the valve cover is not really contributing a ton to that oil leak, because the back side of this engine would be much more oily if that valve cover was doing something significant. So we would go, I want to start with this. I'd want to start with that, check that gasket. I'd also recommend the vacuum pump next, and then we would go on to other things from there, based on what, that should clean up most of this oil leak. I guess a few tips on cars. Oil leaks don't start at the bottom. If you have an oil leak, take it as high up as you can get it. If there's down here is covered in oil, look up higher. If there's covered in oil, keep going up higher and go up until you find the top point that is leaking the worst. Change that. change that clean and see what comes back. I don't know. Welcome to an average day in my stream. I mean, videos, whatever. So I guess to visualize, this whole leak here is 98% of the time that vacuum pump up there. There's a vacuum pump, it'll leak profusely, and it'll just cover up this whole section of the engine with oil, and it's one thing that's leaking it all. It's not your oil pan, it's not your rear main, it's not this transmission pan, it's gonna be that. So be mindful of that when you're talking oil leaks. This thing is just crazy leaking right now though, and we're gonna have to check that. Holy gee willikers, Batman. I mean, this has been sitting here for maybe 4 or 5 hours while I've been working out of that bay on some other things. And that is what it has left in that amount of time. That was not that way before I started. So we are going to go ahead and take off this because we're going to change the oil. But there it is, just dripping away. Just steadily dripping away. Now I got to figure out if it's the housing, if they have the wrong gasket, or if something's cracked. Let's find out together, eh? Got the filter housing off. It was kind of one of the options that I hadn't considered. They never tightened it. I just add that to the rest of the, things that you never... The last thing you were thinking about was over-analyzing it, like, oh, it could be cracked, it could be the wrong gasket, it might have a hairline fracture. No, they just didn't tighten the housing. The bestest of holders. When you have your battery hold down just kind of jacked up under there. I mean, it is, to be fair, it is holding the battery in place. I think they just wedged it under there. However, I don't know if that's ideally what the engineers had in mind when they generated this particular setup. However, this just proves the backyard engineers are much more capable than the real engineers. Oh, God. I don't really want to touch that.